I'm Keith Olbermann, and this is The Resistance. Another day, another Trump pivot that wasn't. American political media, unable to shake itself of the narrow walls within which it has operated for decades, unable to think not just outside the box, but to even believe that there is anything outside the box, has been telling us since the day he announced his candidacy to take over the government that Trump is changing. Wrong again. They use only about 50 terms, but they blurt them, usually in spasms of certitude, again and again, and now in 3 different calendar years. Trump is changing, moving to the center, getting realistic, being pragmatic, becoming a real candidate, broadening his base, guiding the convention back to the middle, toning it down for the debates, appealing to the undecideds, blunting the edge of his rhetoric, transitioning to his left, preparing to unite his party, preparing to unite left and right, preparing to unite the nation, about to go bipartisan, sure to speak presidentially in his inaugural address, guaranteed to reel himself in, certainly to defer to his advisors, going to be guided by Ryan and McConnell, planning to work with his party, planning to work with his cabinet, planning to work with the Democrats, deferring to the generals, planning to drop the angry rhetoric, looking for a more centrist path, crafting a speech to unify the nation, becoming presidential tomorrow, becoming presidential today, becoming presidential tonight, became presidential tonight, became presidential yesterday, will certainly become presidential and stay presidential next time. Nope. We could go back to Van Jones declaring that when Trump honored the widow of the Navy SEAL during his pseudo State of the Union address, quote, he became president of the United States in that moment, period. And, quote, for people who have been hoping that maybe he would remain a divisive cartoon, they should be a little bit worried tonight. Yeah, he remained a divisive cartoon. We could go back to that moment, but that was February fricking 28th. And we only need to go back to last week to see how gullible most of the American political media really is. Trump made his desperate, you like me, you really like me, Sally Field debt deal with the Democrats Friday and outrolled the pivot stories on Saturday. 11:32 a.m. Saturday, Washington Post standard issue political guy, quote, in spirit, President Trump isn't a Democrat or a Republican. He's a freewheeling transactional Paul who looks for wins. No, he isn't. He's just crazy. 12:31 p.m. Saturday, Associated Press standard issue political reporters. Trump the Independent. The deal President Trump cut with Democrats seems to show a different kind of president. No, it doesn't. He's just crazy. 2:24 p.m. Saturday, New York Times standard issue political guy tweeting an article itself headlined, Bound to No Party, Trump upends 150 years of two-party rule, and adds, I'm the Lone Ranger. In some ways, Trump is the first independent to serve as president in modern times. No, he's not. He's just crazy. I'm going to crib something from the book that I think explains both the reason this keeps happening. Trump leaps into the air, or trips over himself, or steps on a rake, or steps back to admire his work and plummets off the scaffolding, or just falls flat on his face and the media says, ooh, look, a pivot. And why it is so important and so damaging to dealing with the reality of our current American predicament. The thing that seemed to be sustaining Trump was the media's continuing refusal to acknowledge that what the rest of us were all seeing and what they were pretending wasn't happening was something that was outside their collective experience. I spent 20 years just in sports news and then 20 years mostly just in political news, and it never ceased to amaze me that sports reporters were constantly expecting, even hoping, to cover things that had never happened before. Meanwhile, their political counterparts seemed to have been entirely constructed out of the conviction that nothing that hadn't happened before in American history could possibly happen now. There couldn't be a candidate who sold his soul to another country to get elected because they had never covered one before. There couldn't be a semi-functioning disturbed psyche occupying the White House because they had never run into one in the Senate or the House or whatever county board they broke in covering. And they certainly couldn't write any of these things because Bill Safire, Tom Wicker, Christopher Hitchens, Merriman Smith, or whoever else they secretly thought they were, had never written such things. So onwards they marched, surprised by every rake they stepped on, awaking each morning fully convinced things would get back to normal and they could rework something they had written in 1999, unwilling to invoke the words treason or madness because they weren't legal or psychological experts, as if you needed to be an electrical engineer to write about how the wiring had just caught fire. So next time you read about the new Trump, or the independent Trump, or the true Trump, the Trump you loved, the Trump you knew, the Trump with a song in his heart, remember, this is because the guy writing the article literally cannot imagine that this whole unprecedented disaster isn't just going to go back to being normal all by itself. And the writer also cannot imagine that everything won't return to that place where he and writers like him can function without thinking. And that the moment it all does go back to being one of only 3 or 4 kinds of presidents we've ever had before, he's the one who's going to get that scoop first. It's simple. No, Trump is not pivoting. He's just crazy. Resist. Remove. Peace.